All right, welcome everyone. It's 2 o'clock and I think I'll just start promptly. Welcome to this CARE seminar that is held in conjunction with the Art of Creative Research exhibition here at the NIE Arts Gallery. My name is Chee Hoo and I am from the Visual and Performing Arts Academic Group. I'm also the coordinator for CARE, the Center for Arts Research in Education. So today, we are elated to have a distinguished panelists or speakers to talk about international perspectives on the intersections between arts and research. So I'll just do a quick round of introductions. We have Prof Woon. We also have Professor Lawrence Wood, Associate Professor Andy Ash. Is that right? Correct. Yes. Rebecca Heaton from VPA. And of course, Mr. Gary Clough from RCA. That's good. I got that right. I will leave the audience to read their illustrious background. It's all available in the exhibition, so I won't take time to plow through that. It's going to be a little bit informal. Today I will just begin by asking a couple of questions that's linked to practice-based research, and then I'll open up to the floor before the speakers end with a closing note that I might pose. Okay, so good. Now, I am going to start by asking everyone here, how is research defined in the work you do as an artist or art educator, and how does it manifest in your creative processes and outcomes? So, yeah, maybe Gary can begin.
I suppose what you would want to think is that it's always there, in that sense of not defining it as a separate aspect of practice. I think as a practitioner, one of the things I do and how I practice is very much through drawing, but drawing is something that I fit into. Some of the conversations I've been having recently has been about this notion of like liminal spaces and liminal time, and how you actually use those moments, not just in terms of an economy of time or scale, but also actually as thinking about what research's role is within as a seed or an instigator of something else. So I suppose it's as integral as I can make it.
Okay, hello everybody, thank you for coming. The research that I do is predominantly related to cognition within art education. And when you see the exhibition today, you'll see a film that I've produced which really tries to embody what cognition means to me as an artist, as a teacher, and as a researcher. So the research component sort of fits with that from an ontological perspective, because it kind of shares my beliefs behind what I see cognition as, from scientific, artistic, living, sort of embodied practices. It also shares an insight into sort of my processes as a researcher, how I inquire using the arts, and whether that's in my position as an academic or in my creative pursuits as an artist, when I'm making and when I'm exploring. So for me, research and art are very much connected and embodied together, and it is a process of kind of living and traveling and being in that particular role. So I don't see them as separate entities, it's very much combined.
Hello. So I tend to use the term visual art practice as research rather than creative research. So I see that as my kind of form of inquiry, my form of meaning making, and that's I would describe as a kind of a dialogic form of research, a kind of a conversation as an artist teacher with my students, with audiences, and also with myself, a way of kind of developing new knowledge and understandings, different understandings possibly through the making. So I often make things in situ, I often make things as installations in spaces, in the gallery often, sometimes outside. I use drawings, I use objects, text, sculpture, and film. And I use those kind of different ranges of materials and processes that best suit the sort of issue that I'm inquiring into. So I often sort of think, even though my first degree was in fine art sculpture, that I'm quite comfortable in a range of sorts of specialisms. So, for instance, the films that you can see in the gallery are kind of my sort of sense of trying to catch my perceptions as an attempt to understand and try to articulate my creative process. So I think that's possibly enough for the moment.
Hello, everybody. My name's Lawrence Wood. I am essentially, in terms of research, a painter. So I think my research is probably quite narrow in its field. And I can trace it right back to when I was a schoolboy, actually. And a school teacher took me to an exhibition in Liverpool in the UK. And the guy that won the prize in that exhibition that year was a painter called John Walker, who was an abstract painter, yeah. And it really made a great impression on me. And since that day, actually, I got interested in painting. And as the years have gone on, I've become increasingly focused on painting and painting alone, actually. I dabbled with music for a while in the late 70s and early 80s, but increasingly I focus on research into painting. What that means is, for me, is a critical reflection on what is painting and what is its contemporary context. I'm interested in the history of painting, the theories of painting, and the personal nature of painting. Yeah, but I also have to share that to fulfill certain research agendas in this contemporary world. And so, for me, research is a process of investigation, and it's a process of sharing the outputs of that investigation with others. And for a painter, that means through exhibitions, through events like this, and collaboration on projects like this. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kian Woon. I must say that among the panelists, I stand out by not being an artist, not being an arts educator, other than right now helping to lead a University of the Arts, which you might know comprises two member art schools, NAFA and LaSalle. But I have been a long time academic, and in that sense too, both a teacher as well as a researcher. But I like to say that this fine combination of artist, teacher, researcher is something very special that you find in art schools and of course in NIE. And it's something which for example, within an NTU context where we have NIE Visual Arts Program and of course our School of Art, Design and Media, it's not quite easy for our colleagues in STEM and even in the humanities and social sciences to understand this special quality. So I will come back to that perhaps at the end of the panel, but I'd just like to say that I do research on cultural policy, and I think it's an important area because it drives agendas, both in terms of arts policy and also arts educational policies. So I have done other research, particularly in two areas. One on social memory, the memory of traumatic events, or sometimes the forgetting of traumatic events. I have also done interdisciplinary research with mental health researchers, including psychiatrists, on mental health, including epidemiological studies of mental health patterns in Singapore. So I think if it helps, I could bring a kind of a perspective from somebody outside of research in arts pedagogies and arts practice. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think it's a really good opener to kind of give us a sense about the researcher, teacher, educator as a whole, right? I want to shift the conversation a little bit into the education side of things. Perhaps if I could ask, what do you feel are some of the benefits of doing this kind of research, but more so, how do you normally facilitate your students, whether it's grad students, into that process? I think I'd like to hear a little bit about that. Anyone can start, it doesn't have to go that way. Maybe you...
I think in terms of integrating research into how we teach, I think it's a huge challenge, actually, but a really exciting one. I think, interesting enough, just to pick up on Lawrence's point, I think we could all talk about an art school equivalency, and we were talking earlier about going into an artist's studio as a student, or going to an exhibition as a student with one of the people that you're seeing at that point as your teacher or your professor. And actually realizing for the first time that actually you're in the same place, actually. And I think that's an incredible sort of moment for students and something that continues. And, it's not new, the Bauhaus, that sort of basic principle of being at a different point in some form of investigative journey as an individual. And also realizing that showing point. And I think for me, one of the great things is actually when you're, like recently I just showed with somebody who actually I taught as a foundation student and now actually leading, the head of research at a university that I work with. And, I think seeing that sort of journey is really important. The other aspect of practice is the fact is that, the great thing about art school is that you realize very quickly that on a Monday morning, the references that your colleagues and your tutors are using are something that came out of the studio around about 12:30 midnight the day before. And I think that is something quite unique about art school education.
Thank you. So for me, one of the biggest benefits is actually accessibility. I think when you engage in creative research, you're opening up to so many different audiences and so many new interpretations of how your research and your artwork can be looked at. And the benefits come on lots of different levels. So they could be personal to you as an artist, to perhaps change the way you think, for you as a researcher, to even challenge what you're thinking about your art or your research processes. But also in terms of accessibility, we have people coming to see our exhibitions and then they bring along groups of students. They then perhaps go and teach in a primary school and then it filters down. So the accessibility for me is really quite important, that everybody has sort of unique perspectives on the artwork that they're seeing and interacting with. And I think for the artist on a personal note, that's really empowering. When you hear people talking about your artwork, you can't help but engage sort of cognitively with what they're saying, and that changes then your research pursuits, your thoughts about your own work, and then you're in this kind of reflective cycle with your audience as well. So access for me is quite key.
Okay. For me, I think there are two aspects to this. One is a philosophical one. For me, I believe creative education is absolutely the most important thing in universities today, because essentially it's about an innovative population. Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you become an artist or not, you can still be a creative thinker and interested in culture, yeah, and sharing. So that's the one thing. So I approach general education. A lot of the students I have might want to become teachers, or they might want to go into cultural management or something like that. Equally important that they're creative. I also have taught students and worked with students who plan to be a professional artist or a designer. And that's a whole different ballgame, because there are things you have to learn about how to be a professional artist, architect or designer. So there are two levels. One is professional and one is general philosophical importance of creative education.
I'm kind of pondering on this and thinking about, in a narcissistic way, referring back to myself and my own practice and thinking about, I think what's been sort of a thread that's run historically is the importance of practicing what you preach. So I've worked in many different environments. I've worked as an artist in industry, I've worked as an artist in residency. I still, like Gary, sort of really find residency situations really key in sort of generating moments for discussion and for thinking about how we co-create and construct and think about different knowledge. But I've worked hard, I suppose, over time to model and to support perhaps artist teachers. I think it's important that you sort of develop a kind of a community of practice. I think it's important for us as artist teachers that it can be quite a lonely space, and hence it's really important to try and seek out your tribe and to be able to sort of establish a kind of a network that's a supportive network of people around you. I run something for alumni that's developed in London at the Freelands Foundation Gallery, which is a way of kind of sharing understandings and developing relationships that are around our own making as artist teachers, but also thinking about teaching as a creative, a generative act. And I think that's really important to sort of think about those relationships, that sort of embodied understanding of yourself in this space and that relationship to your making and therefore the teaching as a creative act. So I would say that exploring some of those theoretical, practical aspects of your own creative practice and sharing has been a really sort of important way of being able to develop new and to develop self as one goes along.
Thank you. Perhaps I pick up on that, and there have been a few other points which we could save for a bit later. I think a forum like this is an expression of that building of a community of practice. Now in Singapore, if I'm trying to pin down the number of arts educators in Singapore, it must be something in the range of several thousand. But for various reasons, I think there are many institutional silos. I think NIE is very well positioned because of its intimate relationship to the entire school system. But then you have the art schools, you have the polytechnics, you have other universities, each having various kinds of arts-related programs. So it seems to me that in the years going forward, we do need a national and regional and of course international community of practice, and to even think regionally and internationally, it seems that we arts educators, this X number of thousands of us, may need to find a way to get together. You see what's happening in NIE, sometimes I can't recognize if there was anybody from my university, LaSalle and NAFA. Do I have colleagues from LaSalle and NAFA here? And is it thank you so much, yeah. And just one, but is it because, yeah, thank you very much. You know, NTU is very far away, but it's cognitively and psychologically, I think there's a lot of room for us to come together. And this is one of many reasons why I've agreed to play this role today. Thank you.
Can I just respond to some of the comments that people have said? And so Andy mentioned about generating a sort of art educator tribe to kind of really showcase what art educators do and the value of their research. I think that's very important in a kind of collective sense in this exhibition, to really show the different ways each of us intersect with research, and on a kind of national and an international level as well, to kind of really put at the fore, this is what artist educators can do, this is what they can achieve, their research has impact, it's meaningful, and it might occur in quite a different way. But alongside that, I think it's also important to perhaps be a little bit rebellious, to engage in interdisciplinary work. Artists quite often like to inquire. So in the research that I'm doing, I'm actually working with the CONIC team, the neuroscience team here at NTU, and I'm exploring from a scientific perspective their views on cognition, but also how they intersect with my own artistic views on cognition being quite an effective experience, as well as a scientific one. And I think the beauty actually is when they intersect with each other, that we challenge each other, we question each other, and that actually makes for really sort of exciting outcomes that are unknown. So it can be quite a scary place. It can be difficult to take responses from people when they're coming from a completely different position to you. But it's also very important intellectually to kind of grow your understanding and develop as an artist that way. And I think then when you share it in a collective like this, and you talk to people from different countries who have had similar or different experiences, positive and negative, it really sort of pushes the boundaries of what's possible with creative research.
Thank you. Actually, I'll take this opportunity to perhaps also ask a couple of the artists who are in the room that's exhibiting for some thoughts, because yeah, it would be a nice thing to share perhaps your processes in a bit. I'll just pass the...
Hello, this is Hong Kong from Hong Kong. Yeah, actually, I'd like to just briefly showing or introducing the background of my work, showing the gallery now. Mainly actually focusing on two directions. First of all is the way of data collection after the intensive research activities. And afterward, another step is explore the methodology of creative collaboration. So the background is based on That's One Festival in Hong Kong. The main thing is talking about poem, the history of poem in Hong Kong. So we have been doing, just only sharing some example, then we have been doing some intensive research about the poems started from the early 60s to the late 80s. And then we have been collecting some examples and then study their content, and afterward collect the data, and then try to do the analysis, and then hope to transform. There's some interesting collective memory for around different kinds of generation. So this is our first step. And then another step is we try to invite different kinds of like an interdisciplinary approach. We try to invite a lot of, maybe from 5 disciplines, like sculptor, 3D printer, and then kinetic designer, animator, film director. And then we, that is really important, have to involve the participation of the student. Sorry for my crack English. So, and then we need to involve student engagement, and then we work together for almost 3 months. And then afterward, we gather all the data, and then the outcome to be multiple screen through film language, and then through editing, and then through some kinds of contemporary, let's say it's the visualization skill. So this is our one of the approach to answer the meaning of creative through research or creative practice through research. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kate. I'm Hassan from Hong Kong, and my work is the long piece of veneer and the white canvas. For my work, I respond to the creative research and applications. For me, it's like an investigation of myself and the relationship between materials and art practices. So I used to explore the transformation of different materials like wood or sea salt or something like graphite, charcoal. We use usually in the studio. And most likely my work is look like landscape paintings, yeah, but that's not my intentions here. When I do some exploration on materials, I will have some images appears in my mind or from my memory, so I just follow that directions and to complete my piece. Somehow, recently, I try to apply some mindful art practice in my work. So, and I also have some project with my student in Hong Kong. They launched some mindful art workshop with the ASEAN student in special school in Hong Kong. We have lots of exploration in different materials, in which the student they can pick any materials from the environment, they try to explore it, and then, so it seems like the investigation with the materials for my own art practice, which I teach to my student, and they teach to the ASEAN student as well. And then you will have an exhibition in Hong Kong by the end of this month here. So for me, it's connected for my own practice and my education, my teaching here.
Hello, I'm Scott Master. If you've been to the gallery, you might already recognize which work is mine. However, if you know me, you might be surprised if you visit my Facebook profile or my Instagram profile. I rarely post pictures of myself. I rarely update my profile picture, so that work is quite a departure from the normal kinds of creative work that I do. It's kind of something that ran in the background, and I'm not sure if anyone had a chance to see it, but those are all accidental selfies. None of them were kind of taken on purpose. They're this kind of weird relationship that developed between me, the touch screen, and the front-facing camera. Almost always when I'm trying to photograph something else, I'm suddenly presented with this picture of myself, which I'm kind of shocked and annoyed at. And I'm quickly trying to flip back, and in flipping back, I'm capturing all these pictures of myself. So I just kind of let it run in the background since 2015. I deleted them for the first year, and then they kept coming, so I thought I will just let this go in the background and just collect these images. So 4 smartphones and 7 years later, kind of a few hundred images collected. This it gotten to a point where I could kind of look at it and just kind of dive into the relationship there. And there's these connections to the hardware itself of the front-facing camera, the evolution of the touchscreen, the software behind it, and also kind of the online apps and this culture of selfies and kind of there are these underlying kind of unspoken expectations between the app and the human-computer interaction. So we often think about apps as kind of being there to serve us, but in actuality, they're kind of there influencing our behavior and discouraging others. But in terms of creative research in general, I found starting very broadly, casting a wide net. So it just starts with a visual, and then I might gather thousands of images, and then I'll go back in and kind of take a look to see what have I been looking at. So I might think I'm starting out with a particular project with a particular theme in mind, but then when I go back and kind of look at all the images, and I'll see certain themes start to poke out, and then it takes it in an entirely different direction. So most of my work is not about myself at all. It's about different aspects of visual culture that interest me. But generally, casting a wide net and then kind of going back and always using the practices of creative reflexivity to just go back and interrogate my own work and then kind of narrow it down and narrow it down. And sometimes I'll find a particular theme or a pool of work that was unexpected, or I may take it in another direction. And I think that's kind of what students try to do when they respond to assignments or try to approach things in a unique way, is they start off very broadly, and with some guidance, you try to get them to narrow it down, until they find something that speaks to them and that works really well for their creative practice.
Thank you. That's a really good explanation of how, and I'm actually going to get Ling to respond for a little bit because she has been reading her dissertation, and then there's a performance piece that has just evolved through this. So perhaps if you can just talk us through a little bit. She thinks I'm putting her in a spot, but
Thank you, Prof Lum. I'll just talk about my work. I've been getting some members of staff and my students to read my thesis that I've just completed 6 months ago, thanks to my supervisor, Prof Lum Chee Hoo here. And basically, to be very honest, I wrote the performance right after my oral examination because it's been such a traumatizing experience. Not that it's not good for me. I mean, of course I learned so much about research and about myself. That's not the point. It's the point of the fact that I have to run through or jump through so many hoops. But at any rate, I'm just being really honest here, okay? This is that process that I went through when I was writing this performance, and I thought, after all this, to hell with it, I'm gonna burn it, right? So that's how the performance came about. But of course, it reminded me of my own upbringing of when we burn things as a Chinese, we burn things as offerings. Not so much as because we hate it, but actually we are offering it to the spirits, we're offering it to our ancestors, right? So that actually also is part of the kind of the process of burning for me, connecting it back to my roots, back to the ritual of burning, offering my blood, sweat, and tears for the past 6 years to my ancestors, fulfilling my duty as a form of filial piety to my ancestors and my parents for doing my PhD, and I'm damn proud of it. And I would like to invite all of you to burn my thesis with me. So after the official opening, we will do the burning. So yes, thank you, Prof Lum.
thank you. This is a good segue for me to kind of go into the next question actually about tensions, right? Because we're talking about, I guess, tensions of the academic institution with the artist and arts educator. I think perhaps I can just get everyone to kind of speak a little bit about this, because I know in some instances you've been dabbling or been figuring out solutions to this for quite a while, but in some instances it's just a new process, right, into practice-based research and what that means in terms of its negotiation with the academic institution. So please.
Okay, I'll start off. I think some of the tensions are to do with credibility, to do with rigor, to do with acceptance of the work that we produce, and also how that work actually demonstrates impact within our fields. And I think we've got some PhD students here in the room at the moment, and hopefully the messages from the artists and the team here kind of speak to you that you can have a role in moving this type of creative research forward and helping to kind of challenge some of these tensions and actually start to kind of explore new ways of looking at the tensions that we face, and to kind of push tensions in new directions and to open up and empower what creative research actually offers. So I think it's really nice today to have so many different people here. We've got master's students, we've got PhD students, we've got artists, we've got researchers, we've got people from ADM and different disciplines. And it's that kind of collective together where the tensions of rigor and credibility and rebellion to some extent can be explored and challenged and questioned. So I would be really interested today to have conversations with people as we look at the artwork in the exhibition about how you feel some of these tensions may affect affect you. They might not be just unique to art education, so it would be interesting to hear how they affect you in your fields, and also how you view the tensions that we face in art education. Do you see them the same as us, or are they different?
Okay, maybe I can add another slightly different dimension to that. One of my roles is also I'm a member of a Humanities and Social Sciences panel for the Research Grants Council in Hong Kong, which means academic staff applying for research grants in Hong Kong come through that panel. Yeah, and we have really strict criteria for whether you get a grant or not, and they are originality, significance, and rigor. Yeah. But when it comes to creative practice and practice-based research, those three headings are not so simple to define, yeah? Particularly nowadays in fine art practice and multimedia practice. Like, what is originality in a world of sharing everything, yeah? And a world of appropriation in music and film and painting, yeah? So that, first there's a whole issue of definition of what do we mean by these terms. Significance, what does that mean? You have to debate, you know, what kind of impact does your work have? Does it have impact within academia in terms of like pure knowledge? Or does it have an impact in society on people's lives? And then the final one, rigor, is probably the easiest one to define, whichever discipline you're from. You know, it's, can you evidence how critically reflective you are about what you do, whether you're an experimental artist or a social scientist, yeah? And the same criteria are applied right across the board. So I've got lots of tension over the next 4 months, because the grant applications are now in, and I will have 40 applications to review with a team of international reviewers, and each application has about up to 8 reviewers internationally. So you can see it's a pretty complex process, and often these proposals will get grades from 0 to A star, yeah, within the same review team. So there's tension within the system about what research is and how it should be funded, yeah. Just to let you know. I don't want to depress you, but it's a reality, and it's a reality that academics face, yeah? You know, especially in Hong Kong and the UK, that I know particularly well, and also in Australia, the same system is applied, basically. And it's a thing that artists, and particularly painters like me, primarily painters, really have to get their heads around, yeah? You can no longer just submit photographs of your latest work, you know. It's not going to achieve anything, yeah? Thank you for that.
I don't see this as a sort of a negative. I'm going to start, and it will sound like I'm being negative, but actually I'm going to turn it around, because I think you need a tactic, basically. You need to think about how you can tackle institutional bias and the privileging of other subjects over your art practice. You have to think about the fact that this is a model that was designed by other disciplines, the humanities, the sociology, science, whoever, and they designed it and run it in structures that are therefore for them, and therefore that's why they dominate it. It doesn't measure or value what or how we do things. So in many ways, we exist on the boundaries, on the margins of academia. Now, that's the negative bit. Now, I don't mind that. Because first and foremost, I'm an artist. And so I personally think the boundaries are interesting places. These are very productive places. These are never static places like contemporary art. It moves, it changes, it shifts. We should be more fluid. We should be more dynamic and exciting, because these places, these spaces, these sites are ripe for attack, to be breached. Now, some people may want to build a barricade. Some people might want to reinforce their positions, and that's fine. These are all different sorts of tactics that you can use. But as artists, as artistic practice, as research, is multidisciplinary. I use the term transdisciplinary more. we don't exist in the boundary of one discipline. We acknowledge multiple contexts, the different ways of doing things and the different contexts which are crucial to us, because we exist in a sort of knowledge production kind of realm that is transformative of knowledge, new knowledge. We often disrupt notions of discipline. The traditional academic subjects that identify and regulate universities are therefore at odds with this, because we have to live in it, we have to embrace it. Therefore, we disrupt these structures and try to transform. And we're quite antagonistic. We expose their frailties, their limitations. And by using socially and politically engaged practice and contemporary practice, we can help them see how rich and fertile this ground is for giving agency and giving voice to others. So my point would be to think about how we can provoke conditions and cultivate locations like today, like this space, this week. So thank you, NIE, for making it possible for us to sort of taking on this territory, this space, these moments for making, and challenging the academic apparatus. And finally, think about hope. I'm going to sort of end on something quite sort of Frererian and think about hope. Hope that they will eventually catch up, and hope that they will catch up with the rest of us in the contemporary world, but also hope for ourselves, because I am hopeful about art, because purely and simply because it is about change.
Very well said.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Tension. I really like it. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning, and it's what sort of puts me back in it later on. I think the important, sorry, moot point, jet lag. But I think sometimes when we talk about tension, I suppose I'm going to say something not necessarily provocative, but we're in a room of people either all engaged in some form with academia. And I feel in terms of the biggest tension is the tension for the people we're not getting involved in these discussions. And I think we've got to be very careful that we become so keen to the parameters that are foisted upon us, or the parameters of our own practice. And I think it's a discussion we've had a little bit already between ourselves, is this notion of impact. And I think quite often the impact's seen very much in an academic context. And I think how do we get people engaged with what we're doing that really don't want to be or don't feel they can? And I think sometimes the constructs of a research sort of like either a set of strategies or a research community, sometimes we have to actually make sure we're bringing somebody or a number of different voices in from the outside. And I think, back to your point of hope, my hope in terms of the way research exercises move forward is they actually start to bring the community into these. And I think it can be done. It's beginning to be challenged in terms of the UK ref, that actually it shouldn't just be housed within the universities. It needs to bring in industry. It needs to bring in different communities that your university is part of. So that would be my sort of hope for how those tensions could be sort of like both challenged, but to be honest, increased. And, with that tension, a greater rigor.
These were some of the themes on my mind when I spoke about the university as an institution. And I like this line of analysis that goes from you to you and to you, and the idea of hope. And I just wonder, perhaps one fundamental tension is the tension between academia and society, or academia and the world. Because while within the academia, we may want to deal with the privileging of other subjects, we are also fighting for some kind of privileging of our own subject and our practice within an academic space and within a global system of knowledge production, which is primarily based on the American model of research-intensive universities. So, to be tactical, to be provocative, to disrupt, it's a marathon. And is there a way to develop new modes of knowledge production, but also creative work? I think this is perhaps what this exhibition and this forum is about. I just like to also say that somebody has mentioned accessibility. You know, both in the humanities and social sciences, and I'm quite sure within the art world, the question of language and the question of languages and modes of communication. I mean, who understands curatorial language, for example? You know, could it be? You know, it's jargon filled. It's, you know, you go to a museum, you read a catalog, and so. So, who are our audiences? How do we really reach out to them? And perhaps we should be differentiated. There are different forums. If we were to leave this room and go into, I don't know, a library, national library discussion, perhaps the way we communicate may yet be different and so on. So, speaking of tactics, we need a whole range of tactics for different audiences. Yeah.
I'm quite mindful of the time. I know that we're supposed to just ask 3 questions and to open to the audience. So maybe I'll just give some time to the audience. Oh, Eugene, yes, please. No, this needs to be recorded, so we need.
I'm going to start with Prof Kwok's comments about being outside of a particular artistic practice. With a brief rejoinder that just because you're not the best cook doesn't entitle you to the same shape as not being the best connoisseur. And the whole point in creative research is about the ability to straddle both lines. You may not be the best art maker, but if you sure as hell know what exactly it is that moves you, then it speaks to a human, wherever that human is. I think one of the challenges that we've always had, I noticed someone used the word tribe, and I was thinking of Michel Maffesoli's Cult of the Tribes in 1996. And in a sense, here we are, ironically, describing and inscribing and prescribing our ways in which we can be inside a perimeter, ironically. The reason I ask this question, of course, is Prof Lum and our dearly departed colleague Peter and I worked on a research project about creativity in the classroom as a research project in NIE. We discovered music specialists, music for whom it was a second teaching option, and the practice of almost 80 to 90% of classrooms in Singapore at the time in 2008, at the time of our research, which was the third community, teachers teaching music. And we thought, well, I certainly thought I would be hauled up to the Ministry of Education to explain in some kind of interrogation room. What actually happened after that was the development of a professional unit called STAR, which helped to develop professionalism among teachers who were qualified and trained teachers, not yet in music. And that has helped. Prof Lum and I wrote a chapter describing the narrative of someone who had not been prepared for music, but was doing it so effectively in the general classroom that we had no choice but to write a chapter about her, naming and shaming her. And it is to that question I think we need to ask, if a teacher was so effective in a classroom not being prepared as a music or art person, what are we saying when here we are commiserating, contemplating the whole process of what art research means and art making means, when there are people outside of us who seem to be doing such a wonderful job in the lives of people who we will never come across. And it's very interesting to discover that one of the artworks today by Paul Lincoln is exactly that problem which Ken Robinson in 1998, when I met him in Bukit Timah campus, was saying, there's a fear that digital art is about to destroy real art making. And yet one of the exhibitions here is about NFTs. All of a sudden, there's this huge gap that we thought would exist between real art making and the real digital art making. And today we don't see that difference. And I guess where I am with this is, do we need to check our parameters?
I think what Eugene, you just mentioned there is actually in creative research, as Daniel O'Donoghue said from Studies in Art Education, creative research is actually about traveling, and we're constantly traveling. We're traveling as people, we're traveling through our research processes, we're traveling as collective groups. Beyond this exhibition, we'll all go out and not travel necessarily in the physical sense, but we're traveling in our mind in the interactions with the people that we have. And Prof Kwok mentioned about curating. When we're traveling, we are actually curating. We're creating our lives, we're creating our experiences. So creative research, for me, as a kind of concluding point, really, is about two things. It is about traveling, it's about meeting new people, seeing new things, and looking at how the opinions and experiences of others will actually move creative research forward. And it's also about a notion of travel, in a personal travel, societal travel, moving beyond. We're in the digital realm sort of at the moment, we're living and breathing it, where's next? And we will travel through that, and we'll do it collectively and we'll do it personally.
I've got something here for all of the art teachers that you're training to think about. So I understand the concern over the elitist nature of art and the language of art and the difficulty of that. I'm a conceptual artist, so many struggle with the language of conceptual art and certainly if conceptual artists curating, of which most artists these days are also curators. They don't just see themselves as artists, which I think is an important point to make. But the role of art teachers, I think, here is really important, to engage with contemporary practice, with issues, and to let go of the modernist orthodoxy as the only model for educating young people about art, and to make things relevant to young people, to about their lived experiences, and not to depend on the canon of the Western, dead, white, European, male painters that are all heterosexuals. These are important things that will make that change and that transition, and these are the important things that I think art teachers of the future need to be thinking about.
Yeah, I suppose the best, coming back to that point about this, I'm good or bad, I think it's just about being open, actually. I think my role is I work on a very particular program, which is a pre-master's program. And one of the wonderful things about that program is it's very multidisciplinary. By the nature of its aim, where it's trying to take students to, but also actually the people that actually join the course. So, we have students that are coming on to a course to maybe progress onto a master's study, say in painting or possibly in design, but with backgrounds as varied as plumbing, surgery, law, economics, chemistry, and actually it's what they bring is just as important, if not more so important. And I think that notion of good and bad, it comes back to that relationship between the the whole community of learners, whether they, assign themselves as a student or a teacher, it doesn't really matter. It's a community of learners. And I think it's that importance of seeing the ability not to be good or bad at teaching one particular area or engaging, but actually being open to engage with that and actually see those fallibilities that you come to something that you're not an expert in that field, but you actually are applying a particular lens to that field which you are confident with, and actually opening up that sort of democracy of the use of lenses within those environments. I think that's really vital to what we should do.
Definitely. Does Prof Kwok want?
Just quickly, I like to pick up on, I think, Rebecca, I really like your work on the idea of cognitive depth. And it seems that this is something that is much lacking, especially in the age of digital transformation, which of course opens up many new possibilities at the same time. And also your reference to neuroscience. One of the challenges of being relevant to young people is how far would you go in terms of the use of technology, and how far would you want to insist that there could be some very fundamental things which we are used to but they are not used to. One of which is reading, for example. Right? And where is the place of reading in a art school curriculum? And what, there's this new work on the reading brain and what it does to the brain. And of course, if you use the word reading more widely, the whole idea of seeing, looking, listening, in the case of music, performances, and interpreting. It seems to me that is such a fundamental part of an arts education. And of course, traveling is very much part of this entire process because of this encounter with the strange and the foreign and the unfamiliar. Now, I've just heard a new term the other day. Somebody said, it's time for revenge travel. We've all been locked up for a few years, and it's hard to get tickets, and you have to book for whatever, plan your holidays for this coming year, and so. But I think the word traveling, and in O'Donoghue's essay, which you got us to read, it's a thick idea of traveling. It's not sometimes I was in senior management in NTU, all these, sending students out to do 1 week of social service in a little village in Laos and so on. We just really want to make sure it's not academic tourism, and that it doesn't really change your life other than to come back home to say, boy, I'm so lucky in Singapore. We are a first world country and they are not. So what does this traveling do to people? And also, what are we? You see, there's this idea too that in art there's a process of translation, and art answers to a fundamental human need to understand and to be understood. And it's true, when I walk into the exhibition, so many things are happening. And it's something that I was about to say later, but one of our NIE teachers, who's a very important artist in Singapore, Tang Da Wu, he likes to say, don't make art, make questions. And I'll just leave it as that.
Lovely. Again, I'm mindful that we are already at 3 p.m. and I think what I'll do is I'll invite everyone into the exhibition and continue this conversation so that we can be open-minded, boundary travelers moving forward. I think that would be good, right? So that I don't need a last word from everyone and everyone can just have these wonderful conversations, especially with all the artists that are here to join us. So please do so. And I think Paul wants to make an announcement.